Hi guys! Tonight we begin inside a small log cabin as winter tightens its grip around you. The sun has already slipped low, staining the snow outside with pale blue shadows, and the cold has that quiet confidence that comes from knowing it will win eventually. You step across the rough threshold and feel the air change immediately. It is not just colder or warmer, it is contained. The smell of wood smoke, damp wool and old pine settles around you, like a memory you didn't know you had. Somewhere in the walls, wind worries at a gap between logs, testing the structure patiently. You pause without realizing it, because even standing still costs warmth out here. The cabin is dim already, though the day is not fully gone. Light leaks in through a small window cloudy with frost and flickers from the hearth, where a low fire breathes rather than burns. You probably will not survive this night if you walked into it unprepared. That is not drama. That is arithmetic. Cold subtracts heat relentlessly, and the people who lived here understood that sleep was not rest. It was strategy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and stay where you are, because the story has already started moving around you. You set down whatever you're carrying, because nothing stays in your hands for long once the cold seeps in. Your fingers want pockets. Your shoulders hunch without permission. The cabin answers back with small sounds, a log settling ash shifting the soft complaint of wood drying near heat. These are not noises you fear. They are proof that the space is alive and holding together. A mainstream historical fact mentioned casually in countless frontier letters is that most log cabins were single-room structures, often no larger than what today would feel like a modest bedroom. Everything happened in this one space. Cooking, working, arguing, and sleeping. That means your night will be shaped not by choice, but by proximity. You move closer to the fire, not for comfort, but for assessment. The flame is low on purpose. A bright fire looks reassuring, but it eats fuel too quickly and pulls smoke down when the draft shifts. Settlers learned early that a fire meant for sleeping should glow, not roar. A quirky detail that shows up in old accounts is that some families name their fires the way sailors named ships, talking about them as if they had personalities. A good fire was patient. A bad one was greedy. It sounds superstitious until you realize how much their lives depended on reading these small behaviors correctly. As you watch the embers, you become aware of your breathing. Cold teaches you to breathe differently. You draw air through your nose, slow and deliberate, warming it before it reaches your lungs. Mouth breathing steals heat too fast. This was not written in manuals. It was learned through experience and quietly passed on. Historians still argue whether this kind of embodied knowledge was consciously taught or simply absorbed by watching adults survive night after night. Either way, you're doing it now without thinking. The light fades another degree. Someone moves behind you, maybe a family member, maybe just the echo of how crowded this place will soon feel. There is no concept of a bedroom here. Sleep will happen wherever the temperature and bodies make it possible. You glance at the walls and see the chinking between logs, a mixture of mud, moss, clay, sometimes even hair or fabric scraps. It looks crude, but it is the difference between tolerable cold and deadly draught. A commonly accepted historical observation is that cabins built by experienced settlers tended to look messier but perform better in winter. The prettiest cabins often belong to newcomers who learn too late that neat lines do not stop wind. The floor under your boots is packed earth or rough planks, cold as stone. You do not linger there. Heat rises and everyone knows it, even if no one explains it in words. You sit, then crouch, then settle onto a low bench or stool near the wall. Already the night is arranging you. This is how sleep begins here long before anyone closes their eyes. Position matters. Timing matters. You feel the quiet pressure of routine taking over. There is a smell you cannot quite name. Smoke, yes, but also something sweet and stale at the same time. Old straw, dried herbs, wool that has been wet and dried too many times. Frontier diaries occasionally mention smell as a guide when sight failed. Too much smoke meant danger. Too little meant the fire was dying. People trusted their noses the way you trust a phone notification today. A strange comparison maybe, but it fits. The cabin speaks softly, and you are learning its language. Outside, the wind rises and falls. Snow scrapes against the logs with a sound like slow breathing. You realise how thin the barrier really is between you and the night. A few inches of wood, some mud, shared heat. That is it. And yet this thin shelter has carried families through winters that would make modern emergency alerts light up in panic. Scholars still debate how much of frontier survival was resilience, and how much was simple lack of alternatives. When there is nowhere else to go, you adapt or you disappear. You watch someone adjust the fire, nudging a log into a better position with practiced care. Sparks jump, then settle. The glow deepens. This is not dramatic, but it is everything. Sleep tonight will depend on this quiet competence. You feel your own body slowing, not because it is tired yet, but because it understands that stillness saves warmth. Even your thoughts begin to stretch out, less sharp, more patient. The cabin grows fuller as evening completes its work. Shadows stack in the corners. The window turns into a dark mirror reflecting firelight and movement rather than the outside world. You're not thinking about sleep as rest. You're thinking about it as a phase of endurance. That understanding settles in early for people who lived this way. Children learned it without being told. Adults carried it like a second spine. You shift slightly and feel the cold respond immediately, creeping into the space you opened. You still yourself again. The lesson is gentle but firm. Here sleep will come when the cabin decides conditions are right. Until then you listen. You breathe. You let the night finish arranging you. You begin to notice the walls more closely now that the cabin has claimed you for the night. They're not smooth. They're not straight. Each log has its own stubborn shape pressed into place with the logic that favours survival over symmetry. When you run your fingers along the surface, the wood feels dry in some places, slightly damp in others, depending on how close it sits to the fire or the outer cold. These walls are not decoration. They are the difference between waking and not waking. Log cabins of the Wild West era were usually built with whatever timber stood closest. Pine oak cottonwood. Trees were cut, not milled, and stacked while still green. A widely accepted historical detail is that as these logs dried and shrank over time, gaps opened between them. That is why chinking mattered so much. Mud, clay, moss, animal hair, even old rags were pushed into cracks by hand. You can see those seams now uneven and patched, each one a memory of a draft that once slipped through too easily. You lean back and feel the wall behind you radiate cold, slowly, steadily. Walls didn't warm the way fires did. They absorbed heat reluctantly and gave it back even more slowly. Settlers learned to read walls the way sailors read waves. If a section felt colder than usual, it meant the chinking had failed or the wind had shifted. A quirky tidbit that appears in some frontier accounts is that children were sometimes tasked with pressing fresh mud into cracks, using their bare hands even in winter because their smaller fingers fit better. It sounds cruel until you realise it was also how they learned early what cold really meant. Your eyes trace the seams where logs meet. Nothing here is airtight. That is intentional. A completely sealed cabin trapped smoke and moisture. Too tight, and the air turned dangerous. Too loose, and the cold rushed in. The balance was delicate and never finished. Cabins were adjusted constantly, sometimes nightly, depending on weather. Historians still argue whether this ongoing maintenance was a conscious system or simply habit layered over years of trial and error. Either way, the result is that you are sitting inside something that is always in the process of becoming stable. The wind presses again from outside and you hear it before you feel it. A low whistle sneaks through a gap near the corner. Not strong, not urgent, just enough to remind you that the outside world is patient. You shift slightly, turning your shoulder toward the warmer interior, instinctively protecting the side closest to the wall. Everyone does this without discussion. Bodies arrange themselves based on airflow. It is not politeness. It is physics. You notice how furniture is pushed tight against the walls. A table here, a bench there. This is not about saving space. It is about blocking drafts. Anything solid becomes an extra layer of insulation. A mainstream historical observation is that cabins with more clutter often stayed warmer not because of sentimentality, but because objects slowed air movement. Minimalism was not a virtue when wind could slip between your ribs. Your breath fogs faintly as you exhale. The fire is doing its work, but slowly. You realize that sleep will not be comfortable in the modern sense. It will be adequate. That distinction matters. Comfort implies excess. Adequacy implies survival. Frontier people aimed for the second one consistently and the first one occasionally when luck allowed. You reach out and touch the chinking near your knee. It flakes slightly dry at the surface. Someone will need to fix that soon. Not tonight perhaps, but soon. Maintenance never stopped. Even in deep winter, cracks were checked, patched, watched. A surprising detail from some journals is that settlers sometimes stuffed cracks with snow temporarily during storms, letting it freeze in place as a short-term seal. It sounds counterintuitive until you remember that trapped air, even cold air, slows heat loss better than open wind. The walls hold stories if you know how to read them. A darker patch where water once seeped in, a cleaner section where a log was replaced, a faint scratch where a child marked height or counted days. These marks are not nostalgia. They are records of adaptation. Each one represents a small decision that made another night possible. You begin to understand that sleeping here is not about finding a perfect spot. It is about negotiating with space. You give a little. The cabin gives a little. You lean away from one draft and closer to another body. You tuck your feet inward. You turn your collar up. None of this is dramatic, but all of it adds up. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. Inside, the cabin holds not tightly, but just enough. Scholars still debate how many settlers truly understood thermal dynamics versus simply repeating what worked. The distinction does not matter much when the result is the same. You are here, you are warm enough, and the walls, imperfect and patient, are doing their quiet work. You settle back again, aware now that the cabin is less a shelter and more a system. Logs, gaps, fire, bodies, breath. All of it interlocking. Sleep will come later, but the conditions for it are being negotiated right now, in this half-light with the walls listening as closely as you are. Night does not sneak up on you out here. It arrives on schedule and everyone knows exactly how much time remains before the cold deepens another notch. You feel that urgency now, not as panic, but as momentum. Preparing for sleep begins long before anyone thinks about lying down. This is the hour when small tasks suddenly feel heavy with importance. You watch as daylight drains from the window, turning it from a source of light into a source of cold. Someone moves to cover it, hanging a rough cloth or animal hide across the glass. A simple action, but a meaningful one. A well-known historical fact is that uncovered windows were one of the largest sources of heat loss in frontier cabins. Glass was thin, imperfect, and often cracked. Covering it at night could raise the interior temperature by just enough to matter. No one measured degrees, they measured mornings survived. You begin to notice how everything has a place and how that place changes at night. Tools that leaned against walls during the day are moved closer to the fire, not to dry, but to keep them from freezing stiff. Water containers are shifted inward so they do not turn solid before morning. boots are loosened, never removed entirely, and placed where warmth might keep the leather flexible. A quirky but repeated detail from settler letters is the habit of storing boots under beds or sleeping pallets. It was not about convenience. Frozen boots could cost precious minutes at dawn, and sometimes those minutes were the difference between tending animals and losing them. Food appears even if you are not hungry yet. Evening meals are not indulgent, they are strategic. You eat because digestion produces heat slow and steady. Fat grain, anything dense enough to last through the night. Light meals have vanished too quickly. This understanding shows up again and again in frontier records, usually without explanation, as if obvious. Historians still argue whether settlers fully understood the metabolic process or simply trusted experience. Either way, you feel it now, a subtle warmth beginning deep in your core as you chew deliberately. The fire is adjusted again, smaller than you might expect. Someone pulls a log back rather than adding one. Flames are coaxed into embers. Overnight fires were meant to last, not impress. A too large fire burned fuel fast and pulled cold air inward as it consumed oxygen. A smaller fire, properly banked, could hold until morning. This balance was learned the hard way often after long nights of shivering or choking smoke. The movements around the hearth are quiet and precise. There is no conversation about it. Everyone knows the rhythm. You feel your own body responding, slowing slightly, conserving. Even standing feels different now. You lean when you can, you sit when possible. Settlers learned early that unnecessary movement wasted warmth. Children were often reminded not to fidget at night, not because of discipline, but because stillness kept them warm. A small detail from some frontier household mentions teaching children to fold their hands under their arms, while sitting a simple posture that reduced heat loss. The cabin smells change as preparations continue. Food scents fade, smoke softens. Damp clothing releases a faint earthy odour as it warms. These smells are information. Too sharp and something is wrong. Too faint and the fire is failing. You find yourself paying attention without effort. This is what happens when survival depends on subtle cues. You do not analyse. You sense. Outside the sounds shift. Wind grows steadier. Snow begins to fall more densely, muffling distant noise. Inside, voices lower, not out of fear but habit. Sound carries differently at night, and quiet conserves energy. You notice that even laughter when it happens is brief and soft. The night is not something to challenge, it is something to settle into. One by one tasks conclude. The door is checked, the latch tested. Drafts are felt with the back of a hand. A crack near the floor is stuffed with a scrap of cloth. These are small acts, but together they shape the night ahead. A mainstream historical observation is that frontier survival depended less on heroic acts and more on accumulated small decisions. This is one of those moments where you can feel that truth rather than read it. You realise that by the time anyone lies down, most of the work of sleeping has already been done. The bed, such as it is, matters less than the conditions surrounding it. Warmth has been banked, airflow adjusted, bodies fed, fear kept at bay through routine. Sleep, when it comes, will be the final phase of preparation, not the beginning. You settle into a quieter corner of the cabin, now aware that the day has fully released its grip. Outside is dark, inside is dim and steady. The night has been prepared for as carefully as it can be. Whatever comes next, the groundwork is laid. You feel that certainty settle alongside the cold, and it steadies you. The fire has changed character now. Earlier it was something you checked and adjusted. Now it feels more like a presence you live alongside. You notice how everyone keeps one eye on it, without staring the way you might watch a sleeping child or an animal that could bolt. This fire is not here to entertain you, it is here to last. You move closer and feel the heat reach your shins first, then your knees. It never quite touches your back. That is intentional. Overnight warmth was never meant to fill the whole cabin evenly. The goal was to create a gradient, a predictable pattern of warmer and cooler zones. People arranged themselves around that invisible map, inch by inch, until bodies, bedding and fire settled into a workable balance. Accounts from the 19th century frequently note that experienced settlers could judge whether a fire would last until morning simply by the colour of its embers before sleep. Someone kneels and pulls a chunk of wood aside, not adding fuel but repositioning what is already there. The motion is careful, economical. Sparks lift and vanish. The fire sighs and settles lower. A bright blaze would feel comforting, but it would also demand attention all night. Worse, it could choke the cabin with smoke when the draft slowed. A long-lived fire burned quietly, feeding on dense hardwood when available, or on whatever could be spared when it was not. In some regions, dried buffalo chips or twisted sagebrush stood in for logs, a practical adaptation that surprises modern readers until they consider how scarce timber could be on the plains. You feel the air shift as the fire settles, smoke thins, the smell becomes cleaner, more resinous. Your eyes do not sting. That is how you know it is right. People learned these signals through repetition, not instruction. There were no manuals. There were only nights that went well and nights that did not. Over time, patterns emerged and stuck. The hearth itself is simple. Stone if available, packed earth if not. Chimneys were often rough, sometimes little more than clay-lined frames that rose just high enough to draw smoke upward. Period descriptions make clear that chimney fires are a constant fear, especially in winter when soot built up quickly. That is why flames were kept low at night. A quieter fire was safer even if it meant accepting a little more cold. The trade-off was always measured against survival, not comfort. You notice how the fire is never left alone. Someone is always close enough to intervene if something shifts. Even when sleep comes, it is light at first, tuned to the sound of cracking wood or sudden silence. One lesser-known habit recorded in a few family journals describes placing a kettle or metal object near the hearth overnight. Not for cooking, but because a sudden change in sound would wake a sleeper if the fire flared or collapsed unexpectedly. Your body responds to the fire in subtle ways. Muscles loosen slightly, breathing slows. But you do not sprawl or relax fully. That would be a mistake. You keep limbs tucked, conserving heat. You sit or lie in positions that minimize exposed surface area. Children were often taught to curl inward like animals, knees drawn up, hands tucked close. This was not framed as advice. It was simply how cold nights were endured. The fire also shapes how sleep unfolds socially. People closest to it tend to wake first, either from heat or from the need to adjust logs. Those farther away sleep deeper, trusting that someone else will tend the flame if needed. This informal rotation emerges naturally in shared spaces. There is no schedule, just an understanding that vigilance moves through the room like a slow tide. There is still disagreement among historians about how much of this nighttime fire management was conscious planning versus ingrained habit. Some argue that frontier families developed deliberate systems assigning roles even while half asleep. Others believe it was looser, guided by instinct and proximity rather than rules. Standing here watching the fire breathe, it feels like both could be true. Structure and instinct blend when repetition turns survival into routine. The cabin grows quieter. The fire becomes the loudest thing in the room even though it barely speaks. You hear the soft collapse of embers, the occasional tick of sap releasing. These sounds are reassuring. Silence would be worse. Silence might mean the fire is failing. You listen without effort, now your awareness stretched just enough to register change. Outside, the wind pushes harder. Snow piles against the logs. Inside, the fire holds its ground. Not bravely, not dramatically, it simply persists. This is what it means to be a sleeping partner rather than a spectacle. You begin to understand why people spoke of fire with something close to respect. It was not warmth alone, it was time. Every glowing ember was another hour purchased from the cold. You shift slightly and feel warmth escape where your body moves. You still yourself again. The lesson is immediate. The fire will do its part. You must do yours. As you settle back, the glow paints the walls in slow-motion shadows. They move like breathing, like the cabin itself is alive and resting with you. Sleep has not arrived yet, but it is closer now. The fire has been negotiated with. It has agreed to stay, and in this quiet exchange you feel the night ease just enough to let your guard lower without dropping it entirely. The air inside the cabin becomes something you actively read rather than simply breathe. You notice it the way you might notice water temperature before swimming. It carries information. It tells you whether the fire is healthy, whether the door was sealed properly, whether too many bodies have crowded too close to the hearth. You inhale slowly through your nose and feel the air warm before it reaches your lungs. This habit is no longer conscious. Cold nights teach it quickly. Smoke is the first thing you learn to recognize. Not all smoke is dangerous. A thin, steady presence means the fire is drawing well. A sharp bite at the back of your throat means the draft has stalled. Frontier households learn to judge this without instruments or words. Diaries from winter settlements often mention waking briefly in the night because the air felt wrong long before smoke became visible. Those instincts kept people alive when carbon buildup could quietly turn a cabin deadly. You notice how the smell shifts as the fire settles into embers. Early evening smoke is heavier, filled with moisture burning out of green wood. Later it becomes drier and cleaner. The scent of resin and ash mixes with wool and old straw. To a modern nose it might seem unpleasant, but here it signals stability. One small but revealing practice, described in some homesteading accounts, involved burning a specific type of wood last at night, because its smell was familiar enough to wake sleepers if it changed unexpectedly. Scent functioned as an alarm long before bells or clocks. Your breathing stays shallow and slow. Deep, fast breaths pull cold air into the chest too quickly. Children were corrected gently when they gasped or sniffled through their mouths at night, not out of irritation, but because it wasted heat. Period letters frequently describe parents placing a hand near a child's face while they slept, feeling the rhythm of breath to make sure it stayed even. This kind of vigilance was woven into care without ceremony. The cabin holds sound strangely. Noise does not echo, it settles. A cough feels closer than it should. A shift of fabric sounds louder than a footstep outdoors. Snow outside absorbs the world, leaving only the cabin's internal life audible. You hear embers settling wood faintly ticking as it contracts someone adjusting a blanket with care. These sounds are familiar and reassuring. Silence would be unsettling. Silence might mean the fire has failed or the wind has found a new way inside. You become aware of how breath and sound intertwine. When the air grows too still, smoke lingers. When someone moves too much, drafts shift. The cabin functions as a closed loop. Everything affects everything else. A widely accepted observation from frontier living is that nights were rarely uninterrupted. People drifted in and out of shallow sleep, waking briefly to check air fire, or children then settling again. Deep unbroken sleep was a luxury reserved for milder seasons. There is an odd detail that surfaces in some winter recollections. People sometimes hummed softly or spoke a few words aloud if the air felt heavy. Not conversation, just sound. The vibration helped move air and reassured them that they were still awake enough to respond if needed. It seems almost ritualistic, but in a space this small, even gentle sound altered airflow in subtle ways. As the night deepens, you realize how much trust is placed in senses modern life has dulled. You're not watching a clock. You're not checking a device. You're listening to your own breath, the fire's breath, the cabin's breath. There's no clear agreement among researchers about how consciously settlers understood these dynamics. Some argue they operated on instinct alone. Others suggest a more deliberate awareness passed quietly between generations. Sitting here breathing carefully, it feels like instinct shaped by repetition rather than theory. You turn your head slightly and feel a cooler thread of air brush your cheek. A draft, not dangerous yet but noticeable. Someone else feels it too. A blanket edge is shifted. A body moves to block it. No words are exchanged. These adjustments happen automatically. The cabin responds. The air settles again. Your eyelids grow heavier, not because the night is comfortable, but because vigilance itself becomes rhythmic. Attention softens without disappearing. This is how sleep begins here, not as surrender but as a loosening grip. You are still aware of the air, the smells, the sounds. You simply hold them more lightly. Breathing slows further. The fire holds steady. Smoke behaves. The cabin exhales. You match it without thinking. In this shared rhythm you edge closer to sleep, trusting that your senses will wake you if something changes. For now, the air tells you everything is as it should be. When it finally comes time to lie down, you realise how generous the word bed has become in modern life. Here it is a suggestion more than a guarantee. What waits for you on the floor or against the wall is a narrow arrangement of materials chosen not for softness, but for how well they slow the escape of heat. You lower yourself, carefully feeling each layer respond. Most frontier beds were raised slightly off the ground, when possible, sometimes no more than a few inches. Even that small separation mattered. Cold pooled near the floor, and anything that lifted a sleeping body away from it gained an advantage. In cabins where wood was scarce, people slept directly on packed earth, but they compensated by adding more insulating layers. Period descriptions repeatedly emphasise that insulation mattered more than comfort. A thick, uneven surface was preferable to a smooth, cold one. You test the surface with your hand. It gives slightly, then stops. Straw crackles faintly beneath fabric. Corn husks shift. Dried grass compresses and releases a dry, dusty scent. These materials are not luxurious, but they trap air, and trapped air slows heat loss. One detail that often surprises modern readers is how frequently bedding was remade, sometimes weekly, even in winter. Straw broke down, flattened, absorbed moisture. Fresh fill meant better warmth and fewer pests. Maintenance followed necessity. You lie down fully now and feel the cold press up from below, muted but persistent. This is where the layering matters. A hide beneath the straw, a blanket between straw and body. Sometimes bark slabs or thin boards added another barrier. None of this feels particularly inviting, but it works. The first few minutes are always the hardest. Your body releases heat faster than it generates it. You stay still, letting warmth build gradually rather than wasting it through movement. Beds here are narrow by design. Space is conserved. Bodies are kept close to insulation rather than spread out. Rolling over is deliberate, not casual. A small but telling practice mentioned in several homestead accounts describes sleeping with knees slightly bent, never fully stretched, because bent limbs retained warmth better. It is not something you are taught directly. You simply notice that it feels right. The materials beneath you carry sound. Every shift produces a soft rustle. You become aware of how even minor movement announces itself in the quiet cabin. That awareness encourages stillness. A widely recognized feature of frontier sleep is this gradual negotiation between comfort and conservation. You adjust once or twice, then settle, understanding that further movement will cost more warmth than it gains. There is no full agreement among historians about how standardized these sleeping arrangements were. Some suggest that families followed consistent patterns passed down over years. Others argue that every cabin improvised nightly, based on weather materials and number of sleepers. Lying here, you sense the truth lies somewhere between. There is familiarity, but also flexibility. Tonight's bed is shaped by tonight's conditions. You reach out and touch the edge of the bedding near the wall. It feels cooler there. That is expected. Walls give back heat slowly, if at all. You shift inward by a few inches, careful not to disturb anyone else. The bed, if it can be called that, is a shared surface more often than not. Space is negotiated quietly. Everyone knows the unspoken rules. Keep limbs tucked. Do not steal blankets. Move slowly if you must move at all. As minutes pass, warmth accumulates. Not evenly, but enough. The straw beneath you begins to feel less like separate pieces and more like a single surface. Your breathing slows further. Muscles loosen just enough. You're not comfortable, but you're no longer cold. That distinction matters. Comfort invites restlessness. Adequate warmth invites stillness. The smell of the bedding rises faintly as it warms. Dry, earthy familiar. These scents are not romanticized in frontier writing, but they appear often enough to suggest how normal they were. Bedding smelled like what it was made of. Nothing more, nothing less. Cleanliness was measured by absence of rot or damp, not by fragrance. You settle your head onto a folded garment or small sack. Pillows, when they existed, were simple and utilitarian. A spare shirt, a piece of fur, something that kept your face from pressing directly into cold fabric. Neck support was secondary. Heat retention came first. As you finally grow still, you realise that this bed, imperfect as it is, has already done its job. It has slowed the cold enough for your body to catch up. Sleep feels closer now, not because you are comfortable, but because nothing feels urgent anymore. The bed barely qualifies by modern standards, but it holds, and tonight holding is enough. As your body warms the layers beneath you, the bedding begins to reveal its character. Straw shifts under your weight, then settles, forming a shallow hollow that holds you in place. Corn husks crinkle softly when you move a knee. A hide beneath everything offers a firmer resistance, smooth in places, stiff in others, where it has dried unevenly. None of this was chosen for comfort in the modern sense. Each layer serves a purpose, and together they slow the night's steady pull. People living through frontier winters relied heavily on materials that trapped air rather than absorbed it. Winter letters often describe bedding as something built up rather than laid out. Layer by layer, whatever could be spared was added until the ground no longer felt immediately hostile. Straw and husks were popular not because they were pleasant, but because they held pockets of still air. Once warmed, those pockets worked quietly through the night. You notice how the bedding makes you listen to your own movements. Even a small shift sends a faint rustle through the layers. That sound encourages you to be deliberate. Stillness becomes a habit rather than a command. One small but revealing habit appears in a few household journals. Some families mark specific areas of bedding that belong to each sleeper, not with signs or boundaries, but through consistent placement night after night. Bodies learned where they belonged through repetition alone. The hides smell faintly of smoke and animal, a scent that would have been unremarkable at the time. Smoke helped preserve them, keeping insects and mould at bay. It also made them slightly water-resistant. This dual purpose shows up again and again in frontier adaptations. Nothing served only one function. Everything had to earn its place. You shift once more and feel warmth collect at your lower back and thighs. Extremities remain cooler. That is expected. People who slept this way learned not to chase warmth by stretching or flailing. They accepted that some parts would always feel cold and focused on protecting the core. A practice occasionally mentioned in winter accounts involves tucking hands between thighs or beneath the belly, a simple posture that conserved heat without extra materials. There is disagreement among modern researchers about how long it took newcomers to adjust to sleeping on such surfaces. Some suggest adaptation happened quickly out of necessity. Others point to letters filled with complaints that lasted for months or years. Lying here, you sense both could be true. The body learns, but it does not forget what softness once felt like. The bedding also plays a role in hygiene, though not in the way you might expect. Straw absorbed moisture from bodies and breath. That meant it had to be replaced regularly even in winter, or it would grow damp and cold. A detail that surprises many readers is how often families carried straw inside during snowstorms, shaking it out and spreading it to dry near the fire before nightfall. Fresh bedding meant warmer sleep. The effort was worth it. As warmth builds, the layers beneath you compress further, becoming more stable. What felt loose and noisy at first now feels anchored. This transformation happens every night, a quiet collaboration between material and body. You no longer feel each separate component. You feel a single surface holding steady. Your breathing evens out. The fire's presence remains in the background, steady and watchful. The walls hold. The bedding does its work. Sleep edges closer, not in a rush, but in small increments. You're aware of where you are, but the urgency has faded. You adjust your head slightly, using a folded garment to keep your cheek from direct contact with the cooler air. Pillows here are practical solutions, not luxuries. Anything that lifts your face and reduces exposure earns its place. Neck alignment matters less than keeping skin away from drafts. The night deepens. Outside, snow continues its patient work. Inside, the bedding holds you in place, encouraging stillness and conserving warmth. This is not restful in the way you know from modern beds. It is functional, steady, and quietly effective. As your body settles fully, you realize that the bedding has already faded from your attention. That is its success. When something works well enough, it disappears. With warmth holding and movement unnecessary, your mind loosens its grip. Sleep feels close now, not as a collapse, but as a gentle narrowing of awareness. The layers beneath you keep doing their work unnoticed and essential. Blankets enter the scene quietly, one after another, and you feel how different they are from the bedding beneath you. The layers below trap heat. The layers above guard it. Someone drapes a heavy wool blanket across your legs, then another across your torso, tucking the edges inward rather than letting them spill outward. This is not about neatness, it is about sealing warmth in place. Wool was prized for winter sleep because it held heat even when damp. People living on the frontier learned this quickly, often after losing cotton or linen blankets to moisture and cold. Journals from winter homesteads repeatedly note that wool scratched, weighed heavily and smelled strong, yet it was trusted more than anything else once the temperature dropped. Comfort was negotiable, reliability was not. You notice how blankets are layered with intention. The heaviest ones go closest to the body, pressing air out slowly and preventing drafts from slipping underneath. Lighter quilts or patched coverings rest on top, reducing heat loss without adding too much weight. A detail that slips by unnoticed in many histories is how often blankets were folded lengthwise rather than spread flat. Folding created thicker zones over the torso and legs while leaving less bulk near the feet, where circulation was weaker anyway. The weight settles on you gradually. It is not oppressive, but it is grounding. Heavy bedding discourages movement, and that is exactly the point. Stillness preserves warmth. Frontier sleepers learned that restlessness cost heat faster than cold air itself. Children were sometimes calmed simply by adding another blanket rather than by words or instruction. The weight did the work. You pull the edge of a blanket closer to your chin and feel the difference immediately. Warmth collects around your neck and chest. Your breath softens. People sleeping this way often kept blankets pulled high, sometimes covering the mouth and nose loosely. The moisture from breath warmed the air slightly before it escaped. There are differing interpretations among historians about whether this habit increased the risk of dampness, or actually helped maintain warmth. The accounts themselves suggest people adjusted based on conditions rather than theory. The blankets smell faintly of smoke, lanolin and long use. That smell signals safety more than discomfort. Smoke kept insects away and helped preserve fibres. It also marked blankets as household essentials, not decorative items. One small but telling practice mentioned in a few family records involves designating specific blankets for sleeping only, never for sitting or working. Keeping them clean and dry meant warmer nights. You become aware of how bodies beneath shared blankets generate collective warmth. Even without touching directly, heat moves through fabric and trapped air. This made shared sleeping practical, even among people who were not close socially. Warmth reshaped boundaries quickly. Privacy thinned as temperatures dropped. What mattered was the shared envelope of heat. As minutes pass, the blankets mould to your shape. They no longer feel separate or heavy. They feel like part of the space itself. You test a small movement of your foot and feel how quickly warmth escapes, then returns, when you still again. The lesson is immediate and gentle. There is no single explanation that satisfies everyone when it comes to how people balanced hygiene with warmth in blanket use. Some families washed blankets infrequently in winter to avoid dampness. Others brushed and aired them near the fire regularly. What remains consistent is the care given to these layers. Blankets were among the most valuable household items, often listed alongside tools and livestock in estate records. Your breathing slows further as the blanket weight signals safety. Muscles release just enough tension to allow rest without full collapse. You're aware of the fire, the walls, the other sleepers nearby, but none of it demands action. The night feels contained. The blankets hold steady. The cold waits outside. Inside, warmth is pooled and protected. With each slow breath, your awareness narrows, focusing less on the layers themselves and more on the rhythm they allow. Sleep drifts closer now, supported by wool habit and the quiet understanding that these blankets have carried many nights before this one. The idea of sleeping alone feels strangely modern as you lie here. In this cabin, space is shared by necessity, not by preference. You sense other bodies nearby, not always touching, but close enough that their presence registers as warmth and sound. A shoulder shifts. Someone exhales more deeply. A blanket edge brushes your sleeve. These are not interruptions. They are part of how the night holds together. Frontier households often slept in group arrangements, especially during winter. Letters and recollections describe entire families occupying one large sleeping area, sometimes joined by visitors or labourers who had nowhere else to go. This was not hospitality as we imagine it today. It was survival logic. Bodies produce heat and clustered bodies conserve it. The cabin itself benefits when warmth concentrates rather than disperses. You are just slightly careful not to disturb anyone. Movement is negotiated silently. Everyone learns the rhythms of shared sleep quickly. One person turns, another responds by shifting a blanket. A third remains still, anchoring the arrangement. Over time, these patterns become predictable. A small but revealing habit mentioned in several winter accounts involves people memorizing where others slept, so they could move in the dark without stepping on limbs or stealing warmth unintentionally. Privacy dissolves faster than you might expect. Cold rearranges priorities efficiently. Elbows touch. Knees press briefly before settling into separate pockets of space. At first, this closeness might feel awkward, but the warmth that follows softens resistance. You feel heat radiate from nearby bodies, filling the gaps that blankets alone cannot manage. Warmth moves in slow waves, steady and reassuring. Children often slept closest to the centre of these shared spaces. Adults took the outer edges, absorbing drafts and shielding smaller bodies. This arrangement appears repeatedly in family letters and oral histories. It was not formalised, but it was consistent. Protection flowed outward. Vulnerability was placed inward. You sense this logic even if you're not the smallest body here. The arrangement has its own gravity. There are different interpretations among historians about how willingly people accepted this lack of personal space. Some argue it was simply normal, unremarkable. Others point to diary entries that hint at discomfort and longing for solitude. Lying here, you sense both truths coexisting. Adaptation does not erase desire. It simply postpones it until conditions allow. The sounds of shared sleep are distinct. Breathing overlaps in uneven patterns. Someone murmurs briefly, then settles. Fabric shifts and stills. These sounds form a low, continuous background that feels oddly protective. Silence would mean isolation. Noise in this context means company and shared endurance. You become aware of how warmth builds differently when bodies are near. The air between you grows slightly warmer, less sharp. Blankets trap that shared heat more effectively. This is why people slept in closer proximity during the coldest nights, and spread out when temperatures allowed. Space expanded and contracted with the weather like lungs responding to exertion. One detail that often escapes attention is how shared sleeping reduced individual responsibility during the night. If one person stirred because the fire shifted or the air changed, others benefited without waking. Vigilance was distributed. This quiet cooperation reduced exhaustion over long winters. No one had to watch alone. You feel a nearby sleeper turn and the blankets lift briefly, letting a ribbon of cold slip in. It is gone almost immediately as fabric settles again. You do not tense. These moments happen all night, small exchanges between warmth and cold that rarely escalate. The system absorbs them. Your own body adjusts to the presence of others. Muscles relax more fully. Breathing deepens. The awareness that you're not facing the night alone allows a deeper stillness. This is not intimacy in the modern sense. It is proximity shaped by necessity, softened by time. As minutes stretch into something less defined, the shared space feels stable. The cabin holds, the fire persists. Bodies remain where they are meant to be. Sleep edges closer, supported not just by blankets and bedding, but by the quiet assurance that warmth is shared and watched over collectively. You let that assurance settle and your awareness narrows again. The presence of others fades into a gentle background hum. What remains is warmth, rhythm, and the slow drift toward rest carried by the simple fact that you're not alone in the cold. As the night deepens, you begin to sense how bodies are arranged with intention rather than habit. It is subtle, but once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. The smallest sleepers are tucked inward, wrapped in the warmest layers and surrounded on all sides. Larger bodies form a loose ring around them, closer to the walls, closer to the drafts. This is not announced or discussed. It simply happens, guided by countless nights of quiet correction. Children sleep more deeply than you expect. Their breathing is steady, their bodies relaxed in a way adults rarely manage here. Frontier life demanded endurance early, and young bodies adapted quickly. Family letters from cold regions often remark on how children slept through storms that kept adults half awake. Whether this resilience came from physiology or familiarity is unclear, but the result was the same. The smallest sleepers were often the least troubled by the night. You feel the difference yourself. The air near the centre of the sleeping space is softer, less biting. Heat gathers where bodies cluster, creating a small pocket of relative comfort. Along the edges where you lie, the cold presses more insistently. Your back feels the wall's steady chill through layers of fabric. You accept it without resentment. This is where you belong tonight. Adults on the outer edges shift more often. Not much, just enough to manage circulation and discomfort. A shoulder rolls, knees draw in tighter. Someone exhales sharply, then settles again. These movements are quiet acts of guardianship. By absorbing drafts and temperature swings, the outer sleepers protect the warmer core. No one frames it this way aloud, but the pattern repeats across households and regions. You notice how blankets are adjusted differently depending on position. Those nearer the centre keep theirs higher, sealing warmth around neck and chest. On the edges, blankets are layered outward, creating a thicker barrier between skin and wall. The distribution of fabric is rarely even. It follows need rather than fairness. This is one of those small truths that rarely makes it into stories about frontier life, but it shaped every winter night. Your own awareness sharpens briefly as a gust of wind pushes against the cabin. The wall beside you cools another degree. You feel it through your shoulder and upper arm. Instead of pulling inward, you press slightly closer, using your body as an extra layer of insulation. The sensation is familiar to anyone who's slept against a cold surface. You do not fight it. You accommodate it. There are hints in old recollections that this arrangement carried emotional weight as well as practical value. Adults spoke of feeling responsible even in sleep, of waking at the slightest change in sound or air. Some remembered childhood nights when they felt safest, buried among bodies and blankets, unaware of the vigilance surrounding them. Others recalled the strain of being on the outside, half awake listening. The memories differ, and there is no single story that fits everyone. You hear a child murmur softly, then settle. A hand reaches out, briefly touches a familiar sleeve with drawers. No one fully wakes. These small reassurances happen instinctively. Touch replaces words. In the dark, warmth and contact mean everything is still as it should be. Your own breathing remains measured. You do not want to pull cold air too quickly into your chest. The habit has become automatic. You're aware of how your breath warms the space just beneath your blankets, creating a small personal pocket of comfort. On especially cold nights, people sometimes slept with fabric drawn loosely over the mouth and nose, letting exhaled air linger. Some found it helpful. Others found it stifling. Like most things here, the practice varied with preference and conditions. The hours stretch without markers. There is no clock to check, no glowing numbers to reassure you that morning is approaching. Time is measured by sensations. The fire settles lower. The cabin grows quieter. The cold deepens, then steadies. You drift closer to sleep, then hover, then drift again. At some point you realize that you have stopped thinking about your position and started trusting it. The arrangement holds. The children are warm. The blankets are stable. The fire continues its patient work. This trust allows your muscles to release a little more tension. Sleep slips closer, not suddenly, but in layers. You sense rather than hear someone near the fire adjust a log. The movement is practiced and minimal. Embers shift. Heat redistributes. The change ripples outward, subtle but noticeable. Those closer to the center benefit immediately. Those on the edges feel it moments later. The system works quietly without waking the whole room. Lying here, you understand that sleep in this place is collective. Even when eyes are closed, awareness remains shared. One person's vigilance lightens another's burden. One person's discomfort shields another from it. This exchange continues all night, unseen and uncelebrated. Your eyelids grow heavier now. The cold is present, but it no longer feels urgent. It has been accounted for. The arrangement has absorbed it as best it can. You tuck your chin, slightly adjust the blanket near your shoulder, and still yourself again. As you drift the boundaries between your body and the shared warmth, soften. Sounds blur. Sensations stretch. The cabin feels less like a structure, and more like a held space shaped by bodies, fire and habit. You let that sense of being held carry you further into rest, trusting that the night knows where everyone belongs. You do not fully undress. That decision was made long before you lay down, and now it feels obvious. Clothing here is not something you remove at night. It is something you manage. Layers stay on loosened just enough to allow circulation without exposing skin. Shirts remain tucked. Trousers stay on. Even belts are sometimes left fastened loosely, more for familiarity than function. People sleeping through frontier winters learned quickly that undressing wasted heat. Putting clothes back on in the morning when everything was cold and stiff cost energy and time. Winter letters frequently mention the misery of pulling frozen garments over bare skin. To avoid that, most sleepers kept at least their base layers on. Wool shirts, long underwear and thick socks stayed in place through the night, absorbing warmth and holding it close. You feel the fabric against your skin now, slightly rough, faintly warm. Wool scratches a little when you first settle, then fades from awareness. Cotton, when present, feels cooler and less forgiving. That difference mattered. People noticed. Over time, clothing choices shifted toward materials that performed better, rather than those that felt pleasant. Comfort followed function, not the other way around. Boots are nearby, never far. You did not sleep in them unless conditions were dire, but you didn't send them away either. Leather left too far from heat could freeze stiff by morning. A detail that appears in more than one homestead account describes placing boots upright near the hearth toes, angled toward warmth, sometimes stuffed with cloth to help them hold shape. This small ritual saved time and pain at dawn. Your socks stay on. Sometimes an extra pair is pulled over the first, not for warmth alone, but to manage moisture. Damp feet lost heat faster than any other part of the body. People learned to rotate socks at night, drying one pair near the fire while wearing another. The rhythm of this exchange became part of the nightly routine, as ordinary as banking the fire. You shift your legs slightly and feel how fabric layers trap air. Each fold creates a thin barrier. Each seam slows heat loss. Clothing becomes another kind of bedding shaped to your body rather than laid beneath or above it. This layered approach was so common that it rarely merited explanation in period writing. It was assumed knowledge. There is no universal agreement about how much clothing people wore to sleep. Some accounts describe fully dressed sleepers, hats included. Others mention removing outer garments to avoid constriction or discomfort. The variation likely depended on temperature, personal tolerance, and what the next morning demanded. Here tonight you find the balance that feels right. Enough layers to stay warm, not so many that movement becomes difficult. You pull your sleeves down over your wrists and feel the immediate difference. Exposed skin cools quickly, covered skin holds steady. Even small adjustments like this mattered. Children were often taught to keep hands and feet covered at all times. During winter nights, a lesson learned through cold fingers rather than instruction. Your hat rests nearby. Some sleepers kept theirs on through the night, especially children or those closest to drafts. Others used hats as makeshift pillows or stuffed them into boots. Heat escapes quickly through the head. Everyone knew this long before anyone measured it. The choice came down to habit and comfort. The cabin grows quieter again. Clothing rustles faintly as someone else makes a small adjustment. Then stillness returns. These sounds no longer register as interruptions. They are part of the environment, like the fire's low murmur or the wind's distant pressure on the walls. You notice how your body settles more completely now that warmth has stabilized. Muscles release a little more tension. Breathing deepens. The fabric around you feels less like clothing and more like a second skin. This is the point where sleep begins to feel possible rather than conditional. Outside, the cold continues its steady work. Inside, layers of wood, wool and habit hold it at bay. You do not think about morning yet. You do not think about how stiff you might feel when you rise. Those concerns belong to another time. For now, the choice to stay dressed has simplified the night. You draw one arm closer to your body, tucking it beneath a blanket and shirt sleeve. The warmth holds. Nothing urgent demands your attention. The arrangement works. As your awareness softens further, clothing fades from focus entirely. What remains is a sense of being contained, wrapped, prepared. The night stretches on, but you no longer measure it. You have done what needs to be done. You're dressed for sleep, and sleep at last feels close enough to reach without effort. Hunger makes itself known in a quieter way than cold, but it is just as persistent. Lying still, you feel it not as pain, but as an awareness that warmth depends on fuel you no longer have immediate access to. The evening meal lingers in your body, doing its work slowly, and you understand now why no one skipped it even when tired. Frontier families planned supper with the night in mind. Dense foods were favoured in winter, salted meat cooked down in fat, coarse breads heavy with grain, stews thick enough to coat the mouth and settle deep. These meals were not meant to satisfy craving. They were meant to burn slowly. People living this way noticed that lighter fare vanished too quickly, leaving the body struggling to stay warm before morning. You feel digestion happening now, a subtle warmth spreading from the centre of your chest and belly outward. It is different from the fire's heat. More even. More reliable. This internal warmth becomes part of your insulation, working alongside blankets and clothing. Settlers did not describe this in scientific terms, but their habits reveal an understanding shaped by experience. Eat poorly and the night feels longer. Eat well and sleep comes easier. There's a detail that appears occasionally in winter recollections, easy to overlook. Some households saved the fattiest portion of the meal for last eaten slowly just before settling down. Not as indulgence, but as strategy. The timing mattered. Food eaten too early burned off before midnight. Food eaten too late disrupted rest. The balance was learned through trial, and once learned, rarely questioned. You shift slightly and feel how even small movements change how warmth distributes. The food inside you responds to stillness. Heat gathers, muscles relax. This is why people avoided unnecessary motion after supper. Activity spent energy meant for the night. Children were often encouraged to settle early in winter, not because of discipline, but because rest preserved fuel. There is some uncertainty among historians about how consciously people understood the connection between digestion and heat. Some argue it was instinctive, noticed without explanation. Others suggest a folk understanding passed quietly through families. Either way, the behaviour appears again and again across regions and decades. The pattern held because it worked. The smell of food still lingers faintly in the cabin, mixed with smoke and wool. It is comforting rather than tempting. No one expects another meal before morning. Snacking at night was rare, not out of restraint, but practicality. Opening containers, moving about, stoking the fire all cost more than they gave back. You rest your hand lightly against your stomach and feel the slow, steady warmth there. It reassures you in a way no blanket quite can. This heat comes from within, and will last as long as the fuel allows. You understand now why hunger at night was taken seriously. It was not about discomfort. It was about risk. The cabin settles further. Someone near you exhales deeply, already drifting. The fire continues its quiet work. Outside, the cold presses on without urgency, confident it will be waiting when the fire fades. Inside, the meal you ate stands between you and that inevitability. Your breathing slows again. The warmth from food blends with the warmth from bodies and bedding. Boundaries blur. Heat becomes shared, layered, distributed. You're no longer aware of hunger or fullness, only of balance. Sleep feels closer now, not because the night has grown kinder, but because you are prepared. Fed. Still. Warm enough. The body understands this state even if the mind does not articulate it. You let that understanding carry you, trusting that what you have taken in will last until morning. The sounds of the cabin sharpen as the night settles fully into place. During the day, noise spreads outward and disappears. At night, it gathers. You hear things now that would have gone unnoticed hours earlier. A beam gives a faint, dry complaint as it cools. Snow brushes against the outer wall in soft, uneven strokes. Somewhere beyond the logs, an animal shifts its weight and then goes still again. You do not react immediately. You listen first. People who slept through frontier winters learn to sort sounds instinctively. Some meant nothing at all. Wood always moved as temperatures dropped. Wind always tested openings. Other sounds carried weight. A sudden crack near the hearth. A hiss that suggested smoke behaving badly. Silence where there should have been embers settling. The difference between harmless noise and warning became second nature. You lie still and let the sounds arrange themselves. Fabric slides quietly as someone nearby adjusts a sleeve. A child breathes in a shallow, steady rhythm. The fire offers its low, familiar murmur. These noises blend into a kind of background that feels stable. When something new enters that background, you notice immediately. This is not anxiety. It is attentiveness shaped by long nights. Frontier accounts often mention how sleep came in layers rather than blocks. People drifted, woke, briefly listened, and drifted again. The cabin itself encouraged this rhythm. No soundproofing softened its voice. Every shift of temperature spoke through wood and clay. Instead of fighting, this sleepers adapted. Light sleep became a tool rather than a flaw. You find that your hearing sharpens when your body is still. Without movement, sound travels directly to awareness. You hear a distant gust before it reaches the wall. You hear snow settle from a branch outside. Each sound arrives with context placed against what you already know of the night's pattern. Nothing feels random. Everything has a reason, even if you do not name it. There is a small practice described in some winter letters that hints at how important listening became. People sometimes slept with one ear uncovered even when wrapped deeply in blankets. The exposed ear cooled faster, yes, but it also carried sound more clearly. Warmth was balanced against awareness, and awareness often won. You become aware of your own breath again, quieter now, slower. It blends with the breathing around you. The combined rhythm fills the space more evenly than silence would. This shared sound offers reassurance. As long as you can hear others breathing, you know the cabin holds. A sudden pop from the hearth lifts your attention briefly. A sap pocket releases. Sparks shift. You tense then relax as the sound resolves into something familiar. This small cycle repeats many times through the night. Attention rises. Attention falls. Over time it becomes less effortful. There are moments when the quiet deepens so much that it feels heavy. No wind, no settling wood, just the soft presence of bodies and embers. In those moments people sometimes stir, deliberately clearing a throat or shifting a limb just to break the stillness. Absolute quiet could feel wrong, even threatening in a world where sound signalled life. You notice how the cabin teaches patience. You do not leap to conclusions, you wait, you listen again. Most sounds explain themselves if given a moment. Panic wastes warmth. Calm preserves it. This understanding settles into your muscles as much as your thoughts. Your eyelids grow heavier, but your ears stay open. You drift while listening, suspended between rest and readiness. The sounds of the night blur at the edges, becoming less distinct, more rhythmic. The cabin breathes, the fire breathes, you breathe with them. Eventually you realize that the sounds no longer pull you back to full awareness. They pass through without catching. This is the threshold where sleep deepens. Not silence, but familiarity allows it. You let the last clear sound fade without following it. The night continues its quiet conversation with the cabin, and you no longer feel the need to translate every word. Your body stays warm enough. The space holds steady. Listening has done its job. Fear does not arrive all at once. It seeps in quietly the way cold does, finding the smallest gaps in attention when you are tired enough to stop guarding them. You notice it most in the pauses, when the fire settles too long without a sound, when the wind stops abruptly, when the cabin feels just a little too still. You recognize this feeling from earlier in the evening, but now it carries more weight. Darkness sharpens imagination. In a place like this, fear was never abstract. It was practical. It tightened muscles. It quickened breathing. And in winter, both of those responses stole warmth. People who survived nights like this learned that managing fear mattered as much as managing fire or food. You slow yourself deliberately. One breath in through the nose, one breath out longer than the last. You count without numbers, letting rhythm replace thought. These small rituals appear often in winter recollections, described casually as if everyone knew them. Calm was not a personality trait here. It was a skill practiced nightly. You focus on what you can touch. The rough weave of wool against your wrist, the steady pressure of blankets across your chest, the firm resistance of bedding beneath your spine. Sensation anchors you in the present. It reminds you that you're here now and that nothing immediate is wrong. The cabin helps in its own way. Its sounds return subtle but reassuring. A log settles, embers shift. Someone nearby exhales deeply. These familiar noises push back against the quiet places where fear likes to grow. You listen not for danger, but for continuity. People living this way developed habits that might look strange from the outside. Some repeated simple phrases silently, others focused on counting breaths or heartbeats. A few descriptions mention pressing feet together, or tucking hands into the warmest part of the body when anxiety rose. These actions were not symbolic. They were functional. Stillness preserved heat. Calm preserved stillness. You become aware of how fear changes the body. Shoulders creep upward. Jaw tightens. Fingers curl. You release these tensions one by one. Each release feels like reclaiming a small amount of warmth. This is not about bravery. It is about efficiency. There is uncertainty among those who study frontier life about how much emotional strain people carried through long winters. Some accounts speak of resilience and acceptance. Others hint at exhaustion that went unspoken. Lying here, you sense that both could exist at once. Fear did not vanish. It was managed, folded into routine, and kept from taking over. A sudden gust presses against the wall, and for a moment your heart jumps. You wait. The sound fades. Nothing follows. You let the tension drain away again. This cycle repeats through the night, smaller each time. Experience teaches you what deserves attention and what can be released. Children often slept through these moments entirely. Adults noticed and absorbed them instead. That difference shaped how nights were remembered. Those who lay awake recalled listening and watching. Those who slept deeply remembered only warmth and safety. Both memories came from the same night. You draw your knees slightly closer, a position that feels protective without being tense. Your breathing settles again. The fear that crept in loses its foothold. There's nothing to do right now. That realization is its own comfort. The cabin does not promise safety. It offers shelter. That distinction mattered to people who lived here. Shelter required cooperation. Firewalls, bodies and calm all had to work together. When they did, the night became manageable. As your awareness softens, fear fades back into the background where it belongs. Not gone, but quiet. You do not need to eliminate it. You only need to keep it from stealing what the night requires. You let your attention drift again, trusting your senses to wake you if something truly changes. For now, the cabin holds. The fire persists. Your body stays warm enough. Calm settles in, practiced and familiar, and sleep edges closer without resistance. The weather does not remain outside the cabin. It presses itself against the wall, seeps into the seams, announces its presence through sound and temperature. You feel it long before you see any evidence of it. A shift in pressure, a deeper cold that settles into the wood. The cabin answers back with small adjustments of its own. Wind pushes, then pauses, then pushes again. Each gust tests the logs differently. Some sections hold firm, others allow a thin ribbon of cold to slip through. You feel it brush your ankle, your shoulder, your cheek. Not enough to harm, but enough to remind you that the barrier between inside and out is thin and always negotiating. Snow accumulates quietly. It piles against the walls, dulling sound and adding weight. In some ways, this helps. Snow trapped against the lower logs can act as extra insulation sealing gaps, the chinking mist. People living in cabins learn not to clear snow away immediately for this reason. What looked like neglect was often a practical choice. The cold itself could be made to work for you if you understood how. You listen as the wind changes direction. The sound shifts from a low push to a higher whistle. Somewhere a gap near the roof catches it just right. The noise is soft but persistent. You note it without alarm. Roof lines were rarely perfect. Smoke holes roughed, chimneys and uneven shingles all created places where air liked to speak. As long as the sound stayed steady, it meant nothing new was wrong. The temperature inside dips another degree. You feel it most in your extremities. Fingers cool, toes stiffen slightly. This is the coldest part of the night, the stretch before dawn when the fires burn low and the body's warmth has been working for hours. People remembered this time clearly. It was when vigilance mattered most. You tuck your feet closer together and feel warmth build slowly between them. Blankets are adjusted without opening them fully. Movements are minimal, calculated. Every motion is weighed against the warmth it might cost. This careful economy of movement becomes automatic. You no longer think about it. Outside, the storm continues its patient work. Inside, the cabin responds with creaks and sighs. These sounds are not warnings. They are the structure, adjusting wood, contracting and settling as temperatures drop. Anyone who slept in a cabin learned to distinguish these from the sharper sounds that meant trouble. Experience taught the difference better than explanation ever could. You become aware of how the fire behaves during storms. Drafts shift. Smoke pulls differently. Someone stirs near the hearth, sensing the change even in sleep. A log is nudged. Embers rearrange. The response is quiet and efficient. The fire adapts. The cabin adapts. You benefit without fully waking. There are accounts of storms so fierce that families slept in turns, never allowing everyone to rest at once. Tonight does not feel like that. This weather presses but does not overwhelm. Still, the awareness remains. The night asks for attention, not panic. You feel the wall beside you cool further as wind presses snow more tightly against it. The cold is firm but stable. Stability matters. Sudden changes are dangerous. Steady cold can be managed. You adjust your shoulder slightly and settle again. Your breathing remains even. The fear from earlier does not return. This cold is expected. It fits the pattern of the night. Knowing what to expect takes much of its power away. As the storm settles into a rhythm, so do you. The cabin holds. The fire persists. The weather presses, then steadies. You are aware of all of it without feeling threatened by any of it. Sleep deepens another layer. The sounds of wind and wood blur together, becoming part of the background. Sensations soften. The cold is still present, but it no longer feels like something you must actively manage. The systems you set in place earlier continue their work. You drift further now, held between the steady pressure of winter and the quiet resilience of the shelter around you. The storm can do what it will. For now, the cabin stands, and you rest within it. At some point in the night, you become aware that the cabin is more crowded than usual. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but through small signs that add up. An unfamiliar coat hangs near the door. A new shape occupies a corner of the floor. The air carries an extra layer of breath. Travellers have arrived late, or neighbours have come in from farther out, drawn by weather that made solitary cabins feel risky. No one announces their presence now. That happened earlier in low voices with quick greetings and practical decisions. Where to sit, where to sleep, who needs the warmest place. By the time you're lying still, those questions have already been answered through motion rather than discussion. Blankets are shifted. Bedding expands. Bodies make room. You feel someone settle near your feet, careful not to jostle you. The warmth changes immediately. The cold that crept in from that direction softens. Heat spreads more evenly across the shared space. This is one of the quiet benefits of crowding that people living this way understood instinctively. More bodies meant more warmth. Discomfort was temporary. Cold could be permanent. The sounds of the cabin adjust as well. Breathing patterns overlap differently. Someone clears their throat softly. A stranger coughs once, then stills. These sounds register briefly, then blend into the background. Familiarity grows quickly in the dark. By morning, these people will feel less like visitors and more like part of the night itself. Shared sleep among people who didn't know each other well was common during harsh weather. Work crews passing, traders, neighbours whose fires failed. The rules were simple and rarely spoken. Keep still, share warmth, respect space as much as conditions allow. Trust that everyone here has the same goal. Make it to morning. You notice how personal boundaries adjust without friction. Someone's elbow rests closer than you would normally accept. A blanket edge covers more than one body. These changes feel practical rather than intimate. Cold simplifies social expectations. What matters is function. There is a faint smell you do not recognize immediately. Different soap, different leather, a hint of travel. It fades as it warms, blending with smoke and wool. Scents become less distinct as heat rises. The cabin absorbs them, smoothing differences the way it smooths sound. You remain still, allowing the new arrangement to settle. Movement now would cost warmth and disturb others. The stranger near your feet shifts once, then stops. The bedding compresses further, becoming more stable with added weight. What felt loose earlier now feels anchored. There are stories from this era that describe nights so crowded people slept sitting up, leaning against one another in turns. Tonight does not reach that extreme, but the principle is the same. Warmth is pooled where it can be. Space becomes secondary. You sense that vigilance is distributed differently now. With more people present, responsibility spreads thinner. If one person wakes, others benefit. If the fire shifts, someone closer will notice. This shared awareness allows deeper rest for everyone else. You feel it in your own body as tension eases another notch. The wind presses outside again, but it feels farther away now. The added warmth changes how cold reaches you. It dulls the edges. You breathe more deeply without realizing it. The presence of others reassures without demanding attention. Sleep moves closer, not in a straight line, but in gentle waves. You drift surface briefly when someone nearby adjusts, then drift again. Each time returning to stillness feels easier. By the time the cabin grows quiet again, the strangers no longer feel distinct. They are simply bodies sharing the night. Heat sources, listeners, witnesses. The night does not care who arrived from where. It responds only to what is here now. You let that understanding settle. The crowding no longer feels like an interruption. It feels like reinforcement. The cabin holds more life, and life holds more warmth. With that balance restored, you allow yourself to sink deeper into rest, trusting the shared space to carry you through the remaining hours of dark. You become aware of movement long before it reaches you. Not the restless shifting of sleepers, but something quieter and more deliberate. Someone is awake while others remain lost in heavier rest. The cabin does not stir all at once. Instead, it acknowledges this wakefulness through subtle changes. A blanket lifts and settles. A knee presses into the floor, then withdraws. The air shifts slightly as a body moves through it. This kind of nighttime labour belongs mostly to women, though no one names it that way here. Care continues after sleep begins. Someone checks the fire without fully rising, reading its state from warmth alone. Another reaches out to adjust a child's blanket, tucking fabric back under a chin that has drifted free. These actions are practiced, economical, and rarely spoken of later. They simply happen. You feel a hand brush near your shoulder as a blanket edge is smoothed into place. The touch is light, almost absent, but it changes everything. A draft disappears. Warmth holds. You remain still, knowing that waking fully would interrupt more than it would help. This is care designed not to be noticed. Throughout frontier households, much of the night's work was invisible by morning. Water was checked so it would not freeze. Socks were moved closer to embers. Damp clothing was repositioned to dry without smoking. These tasks did not require full wakefulness. They lived in a half state between sleep and alertness, carried by habit rather than thought. You notice how the cabin feels steadier when someone is awake within it. Even if you do not know who their presence shifts the atmosphere. The fire seems less likely to fail. The air feels watched. This awareness allows others to rest more deeply. Vigilance is not shared equally. It flows where it is needed. There is a quiet efficiency to this nighttime care. No lanterns are lit unless absolutely necessary. Light wastes warmth and wakes too many eyes. Hands move by memory. Feet know where to step without sound. The floor is familiar enough to navigate in darkness. This familiarity comes from repetition from nights like this one stacked end to end. You sense a pause near the hearth. Someone crouches, listens, then makes a small adjustment. Embers shift. Heat redistributes. The change reaches you moments later, subtle but welcome. You breathe out more fully and sink back into stillness. Children rarely remember these moments. Adults do. Later recollections often speak of waking to find everything somehow right again. Blankets returned, fire steady, air safe. The work itself fades, but the effect remains. There is no clear line between rest and responsibility here. The two overlap, blending into a continuous state of readiness. Even sleep is not an absence of care. It is a softer version of it. You feel the night stretch onward. The cold outside persists. Inside, this quiet labour keeps pace with it. Each small adjustment counters a small loss. Together they add up to survival. Your own body responds to this unseen work. Muscles loosen further. Breathing deepens. The sense of being watched over allows you to let go of the last thin edge of alertness. You do not need to stay half awake tonight. Someone else is carrying that weight. As awareness fades, you catch one last impression. A figure settling back into place. The rustle of fabric. The return of stillness. Then even that dissolves. Sleep deepens, supported not only by fire and walls, but by the quiet persistence of care that moves through the cabin long after eyes have closed. Illness announces itself softly at night. You feel it not as pain at first, but as imbalance. A breathing pattern that does not match the rest. A body that radiates too much heat or not enough. A restlessness that does not settle with blankets or stillness. In a cabin like this, sickness cannot hide for long. You notice someone nearby shifting more than the others. The movement is careful, restrained, as if they're trying not to draw attention. A cough follows muffled into fabric, then silence again. The night absorbs it, but not completely. Awareness sharpens around that sound the way it always does. When illness entered a winter cabin, sleeping arrangements changed quietly. People made room without comment. Extra blankets appeared where needed most. Children were nudged closer to the centre. Someone unwell might be placed nearer the fire even if that meant others accepted colder positions. Heat was medicine before medicine arrived. You feel the air change as another blanket is added somewhere nearby. Warmth redistributes. The fire seems closer even if it has not moved. Bodies adjust not abruptly, but through small accommodations that ripple outward. No one complains. This is how it works. There are nights recorded in memory where sickness shaped everything. Fevers that burned while the cabin froze. Weak breaths listened to as closely as the fire's behaviour. People slept lightly, then waking often, counting breaths without counting numbers. Care became collective. Everyone listened. You sense a hand pass close to your head, checking skin temperature with practiced ease. The touch is brief, gentle. It does not wake the sleeper fully, but it tells the watcher what they need to know. Too warm, too cool. Still breathing evenly. Good enough for now. Illness made winter nights longer. Not because the hours changed, but because attention never fully rested. Even those not directly involved felt it. Awareness hovered closer to the surface. Sleep came in shorter stretches. No one fought this. The night demanded it. You remain still, understanding that your own rest contributes to the whole. Someone must sleep deeply if someone else cannot. Strength has to be conserved somewhere. This balance shifts night by night, person by person. There are accounts that speak of herbal smells drifting through cabins at night. Roots steeped quietly, poultices warmed near embers. These were not cures in the modern sense, but they offered comfort and familiarity. Smell alone could soothe, signalling that something was being done. You breathe in and catch a faint trace of something bitter and earthy. It mixes with smoke and wool, becoming part of the cabin's scent. You do not know its name, but you recognize its purpose. It means care is active. The sick sleeper shifts again, then settles. Breathing evens out. The moment passes for now. The cabin relaxes by degrees. Attention does not vanish, but it loosens its grip. Sleep returns in layers, shallow first, then deeper. You drift surface briefly at another cough, then drift again. Each time, returning to stillness feels easier. The night absorbs these interruptions the way it absorbs cold, gradually. By morning, this may all be remembered or it may blur into nothing. Many such nights did. What remained was the fact that the night was survived, that everyone was still here. As you sink further into rest, you trust the quiet system around you. Fire, walls, bodies, care. None of it dramatic, all of it essential. The cabin holds again and sleep cautious but steady carries you onward. At some point your attention drifts toward the fire again, not because it has changed dramatically, but because it has grown quieter. The bright personality it had earlier in the evening has softened into something more restrained. Embers glow low and red, tucked beneath a skin of ash. The warmth they give off is subtler, now felt more than seen. This is the moment people worried about most. Not the first hours after dark when energy is still high, but this stretch when the fire must decide whether it will last. You listen for it without opening your eyes. The faintest tick of wood shifting. The almost inaudible sigh of settling ash. These sounds tell you the fire is still alive. Someone stirs near the hearth. Not fully awake, not fully asleep. A hand reaches out guided by memory and nudges a log inward. The movement is small, deliberate. Too much, and flames might rise and smoke the room. Too little, and the fire could die before dawn. The adjustment is made and the embers respond glowing a shade brighter. Fire failure was one of the quiet fears of winter nights. Without heat, the cabin changed quickly. Breath fogged, fingers numbed. Panic followed close behind. People who slept through these winters learned to prevent failure rather than respond to it. That meant checking the fire, often even while half asleep. You feel the warmth shift slowly across the floor, reaching places it had not touched in hours. It takes time. Fire does not rush. It persuades. The change reaches your legs first, then your hips. You relax into it, careful not to move too much and disrupt the fragile balance. There are stories of nights when fires failed completely, when families woke shivering and rushed to relight embers from hidden coals kept just for that purpose. Some cabins stored live coals buried in ash or tucked into clay pots, insurance against disaster. Others relied on neighbours or sheer luck. Tonight that risk feels distant. The fire is still breathing. The cabin responds to the renewed heat with soft sounds. Wood expands slightly. The floor gives a quiet complaint. These noises reassure rather than alarm you. They mean warmth is returning, that the structure is adjusting rather than cracking. You notice how the air changes when the fire strengthens even a little. It feels less sharp when you inhale. Your chest loosens. The smell of smoke shifts again, cleaner, more settled. Someone exhales deeply nearby, as if their body noticed the difference before their mind did. Fire tending at night was rarely remembered as work. It blended into the background of winter memory, overshadowed by daylight labour. Yet it was this quiet attention that made sleep possible at all. Without it, nights stretched long and dangerous. You drift closer to sleep again, buoyed by the knowledge that the fire has been cared for. The fear of waking cold recedes. Your muscles release another layer of tension. You turn your head slightly and let your cheek settle into warmer fabric. The fire continues its patient work. Not loud, Not dramatic, just steady enough. Outside the cold waits, inside the balance holds. Sleep deepens, carrying you further away from worry and closer to rest. The fire remains glowing softly, a constant companion through the dark. You no longer listen for it consciously. Trust has replaced vigilance, and with that trust, the night loosens its grip just enough to let you go. Sleep does not arrive as a clean break. It comes in fragments stitched together by sensation rather than time. You surface drift again. Each return feels softer than the last. The cold no longer announces itself sharply. It lingers at the edges, a presence you are aware of without needing to answer. Your dreams take on the shape of the night around you. They're not stories so much as impressions, warmth and weight. Darkness threaded with ember glow. The sense of being enclosed. People who slept this way often describe dreams that felt close to waking, as if the mind never fully left the room. There was no deep separation between sleeping and listening. The two blended. You half dream of the fire, though it looks nothing like fire usually does. It becomes a low red horizon pulsing gently. You feel its heat rather than see it. Somewhere in that dream the sound of breathing merges with the sound of wind, and for a moment they are the same thing. Then they separate again and you drift further. Your body remains aware of temperature even as thought fades. When a cooler pocket of air slips under the blankets, you shift without waking fully. Knees draw closer, chin tucks. The movement happens inside the dream rather than outside it. By the time you surface slightly, warmth has already returned. This kind of half-sleep was common during winter. It allowed people to rest while still responding to their surroundings. Those who lived through long cold seasons learned that complete unconsciousness was not always desirable. Light sleep kept them alive. It let them wake quickly if the fire changed or the air felt wrong. You sense someone near you turn over and the dream bends around it. The movement becomes part of whatever image your mind is holding. A door closing, a hill shifting. Then stillness again. You sink back without effort. Time stretches strangely here. Without clocks or light, you do not know how long you've been asleep. Minutes and hours feel similar. The body measures time by sensation instead. The fire's heat dips slightly, then rises again. The air thickens, then thins. Each change nudges you closer to waking or deeper into rest. There are moments when you surface just enough to listen. Everything sounds as it should. Fire present, breathing steady, wind consistent. You let yourself sink again satisfied. Dreams wander through familiar shapes. A wall that leans but does not fall. A blanket that becomes a field of tall grass. Footsteps that never quite reach you. None of it feels urgent. None of it pulls you fully awake. The mind is resting in the same careful way the body is. You notice that your dreams are quiet. No sudden images. No sharp edges. Cold dreams tend to be muted, focused on sensation rather than colour. Warmth feels large. Stillness feels heavy. These impressions repeat without narrative, looping gently. At some point the dream thins enough that you are aware of your own breathing again. Slow. Even. You recognize the feeling of being warm enough. Not comfortable, not luxurious, just sufficient. That recognition allows the mind to loosen further. Sleep deepens in stages. Each one carries you farther from vigilance without abandoning it completely. You remain part of the room even as thought fades. The cabin, the fire, the bodies around you all exist inside the same dim awareness. You drift again this time without noticing the transition. The night holds you gently and your dreams follow its rhythm, steady and unhurried, shaped by cold warmth and the quiet persistence of survival. Something stirs beyond the cabin, and you sense it before it becomes sound. Not danger, not urgency, just presence. A shift in the rhythm of the night. You hear it as a faint scrape, then a pause. Snow compressing under weight. a soft huff of breath carried briefly by the wind. Animals move differently at night. Their sounds are measured purposeful. You know this without needing to identify the source. A deer passing close to the wall, a dog circling before settling again, livestock shifting in their sleep, nearby hooves pressing into frozen ground. These sounds do not trigger alarm, they belong here. Many frontier cabins were built with animals close by, sometimes only a thin wall or short distance away. Livestock provided more than labour and food. Their presence added warmth to the surroundings and reassurance to the night. The sound of a cow breathing or a horse stamping could be as comforting as the fire itself. Silence from the animals, on the other hand, drew attention quickly. You hear a familiar low sound from outside, steady and untroubled. An animal settling back into rest. The tension in your body eases slightly. Whatever passed through is gone. Nothing has changed in a way that requires response. Dogs, when present, often slept near the threshold, not guarding in the dramatic sense, but listening. Their ears caught what human ears missed. Their movements signalled changes before sound reached the cabin. A dog lifting its head, a soft growl that never fully forms, then quiet again. People trusted these cues without discussion. You remain still, allowing the sounds to resolve themselves. Moving too quickly would only wake others and cost warmth. This listening is passive practiced, the kind that lives beneath sleep rather than above it. Outside, the night continues its slow traffic. Snow falling from branches, a small animal darting and stopping, wind passing through grass buried beneath drifts. None of it presses close enough to matter. The cabin stands as a boundary, thin but sufficient. Inside, the fire remains steady. Breathing around you stays even. The shared warmth holds. You tuck your chin slightly and let your attention drift again, satisfied that the world beyond the logs is behaving as expected. There were nights when animal sounds meant trouble. Predators testing fences, livestock panicking in storms. Those nights pulled people fully awake. Tonight is not one of them. Tonight the sounds remain low and ordinary, woven into the fabric of winter. You notice how your body distinguishes between meaningful noise and background without conscious effort. The skill is quiet and efficient. It lets you rest without surrendering awareness completely. As the animal presence fades back into the night, your mind loosens its hold again. Sleep thickens. The outside world retreats just far enough to stop demanding attention. You drift, held by firewalls and the steady sense that everything beyond them is moving as it should. The night carries on and you move with it, neither fully awake nor fully gone, balanced in the space that makes winter sleep possible. You wake without fully waking. The shift is so small it barely counts as a change, more like a ripple passing through the surface of sleep. Something has altered. Not enough to alarm you, but enough to register. The cabin feels different by a fraction. A cooler edge, a quieter fire, the night moving forward. This happens more than once before morning. Small awakenings layered between deeper rest. You open your eyes just enough to take in the glow from the hearth, then let them close again. Each time you make a tiny adjustment. A blanket pulled higher over a shoulder. Feet pressed together. A knee drawn in. These corrections happen without thought, guided by sensation rather than intention. People sleeping through winters like this rarely stayed still all night. They learned to wake briefly, make one useful change, and sink back down. It conserved warmth better than restless tossing. It also conserved energy. You do not sit up. You do not stretch. You move only what must be moved. Someone nearby stirs at the same moment you do, as if the cabin itself prompted both of you. A blanket lifts and settles. A quiet sigh escapes. Then stillness returns. These shared adjustments ripple outward, each one smoothing a small imbalance before it grows. You notice how the fire looks lower now, its light softer spread thin across the floor. The embers hold, but they no longer dominate the room. This is the stretch when warmth depends more on what has already been stored than on what is actively produced. Bedding, clothing, bodies all carry the load together. Your breath feels cooler as it leaves you warmer as it returns. You pull fabric a little closer to your mouth without covering it completely. The air you breathe feels more forgiving that way. This posture becomes comfortable quickly, and you do not question it. The floor beneath you feels colder than before. Cold sinks. It always has. You're glad for the layers beneath you now, for the care taken earlier in the night. Without them, this hour would feel very different. The difference between planning and hoping becomes clear here in the quiet stretch when the night asks whether your choices were enough. You listen briefly. The sounds are familiar. Wind steady. Wood settled. Breathing even. No new signals rise above the rest. That confirmation allows you to let go again. The habit of checking without worrying has been learned well. In some cabins, this was the hour when people rose to add fuel. In others, they let the fire coast, trusting the banked embers to last. Both approaches worked under the right conditions. Tonight, no one stands. The stillness holds. The decision has already been made. You shift your weight slightly, careful not to open space for cold to rush in. The bedding responds, compressing and warming again. Your body relaxes into the shape it has created. This position feels earned, the result of many small negotiations throughout the night. Sleep deepens again, but not completely. Awareness lingers just beneath the surface, ready to rise if needed. This balance feels natural now. You no longer crave full unconsciousness. You trust this lighter rest to carry you through. The night continues its slow arc. Somewhere beyond the walls, the world is changing by degrees. Inside, you remain warm enough. The system holds. You drift again, letting the small awakening dissolve, confident that if something truly changes, you will feel it. The place you're sleeping carries the imprint of the land beyond the walls, even if you never step outside. You can feel it in the way the cold behaves, in how the air presses and releases in the sounds that reach you through wood and earth. Cabins built on open plains feel different at night than those tucked into forest or set against rising ground. The night teaches this without explanation. Here the cold arrives evenly without sudden drops. Wind has room to gather itself before it reaches the walls. You hear it coming from a distance, a low presence that grows and then settles. In wooded regions, nights behave differently. Trees broke the wind but carried sound. Snow fell heavier, dampening movement. In higher ground, cold sharpened, quickly biting sooner and holding longer. People noticed these differences not through maps, but through how sleep felt. You shift slightly and notice that the cabin seems to lean into the weather rather than resist it. Its orientation matters. The door faces away from prevailing winds. The smallest window catches light but not drafts. These choices were rarely decorative. They were responses to landscape learned through experience, sometimes at great cost. Cabins that ignored these lessons did not stay comfortable for long. Inside sleeping arrangements adapt to the land as well. In open country, people tended to cluster tighter, guarding against sweeping drafts. In sheltered areas, bodies could spread a little farther apart, relying more on fire and less on shared warmth. You feel the logic of this even now, lying where you are. The night behaves predictably and the cabin answers it well. The materials beneath you tell part of the same story. Straw gathered from nearby fields carries a faint scent of open ground. Hides cured from animals that moved across wide distances hold warmth differently than fur from forest creatures. These distinctions were not spoken of often, but they were felt. Bedding reflected the land just as walls did. You listen again. The wind does not whistle sharply. It moves in long, even breaths. Snow presses but does not scrape. This steadiness allows deeper rest. Sudden changes wake people. Predictable pressure lets them sleep. Over time, communities learned where to build, how to face a cabin, where to place a fire, all based on how nights unfolded. There are memories from different regions that do not quite align. Some speak of nights broken by constant gusts. Others recall heavy silence under deep snow. Neither account is wrong. They describe different places answering winter in their own ways. The cabin you're in belongs to one of those answers shaped by trial rather than theory. Your body responds to this regional rhythm without effort. Breathing stays even. Muscles remain loose enough. You no longer brace for sudden cold. The night has shown you its pattern, and you accept it. As sleep deepens, the distinctions blur. Forest or plain hill or valley, the cabin becomes its own small world. Still the land continues to speak through it, guiding how warmth holds and how rest arrives. You let that awareness fade gently. The night has been understood well enough. For now, the place you're in knows how to carry you, and you trust it to do so until morning draws closer. There are traces in the way the cabin is arranged that did not originate with the people sleeping inside it now. You sense it in the placement of the fire pits slightly lower than expected, in the way heat seems to linger close to the ground rather than rising too quickly, in how bedding is spread outward instead of stacked high. These choices feel older than the walls themselves. Long before log cabins dotted this landscape, others learned how to sleep through winters like this. Their knowledge did not arrive as instructions. It arrived as observation, imitation, and quiet adaptation. Settlers borrowed what worked, sometimes knowingly, sometimes without realizing where the ideas came from. Techniques shifted as they passed from one group to another, changing shape but keeping purpose. You feel this blending most clearly in how warmth is managed. The fire does not dominate the room, it cooperates with it. Heat moves laterally as much as upward, staying where bodies can use it. This approach echoes sleeping spaces that relied on shared warmth rather than towering flames. Even the way blankets are tucked inward rather than piled high reflects an understanding that trapping air matters more than creating height. Some of the habits feel slightly mismatched, as if borrowed pieces were fitted together over time. Straw and hides arranged in patterns that do not quite align with European bedding traditions. Sleeping closer to the floor than raised beds would suggest. These combinations worked well enough to survive, and survival was the only measure that mattered. You notice how people here trust the ground more than you might expect. Rather than avoiding it completely, they insulate against it. Earth holds temperature steadily once shielded. This principle shows up in how bedding is layered and how bodies are positioned. The ground is not the enemy if treated carefully. The night feels calmer because of this accumulated wisdom. Not because it is perfect, but because it has been tested. You sense that many small failures came before this arrangement settled into something reliable. Cold nights that taught painful lessons, mornings that demanded change. Over time, those lessons hardened into habit. As you lie still, the cabin feels less like a single tradition, and more like a conversation stretched across generations. Ideas folded into one another. Methods refined through necessity. No one here needs to explain why things are done this way. The reasons are embedded in the results. You breathe evenly, feeling warmth hold in familiar places. The fire behaves. The bedding supports. The night presses but does not intrude. This balance feels intentional, even if no one living could trace its origins clearly. Sleep deepens again, carried not just by what is present, but by what has been learned and retained. The cabin holds knowledge in its shape, and tonight that knowledge holds you. By now, the stories you've heard about frontier life feel distant from the night you're actually living. The image of wide-open freedom of solitary cabins glowing bravely against endless snow fades when measured against the small practical realities surrounding you. Sleep here is not heroic. It is careful. It is repetitive. It is shaped by compromise. Romantic ideas rarely survive their first winter. People who arrived expecting adventure learned quickly that nights were spent managing small things rather than dreaming big ones. Blankets had to be positioned just right. Fires needed patience. Bodies learned where to settle so that cold didn't creep in unnoticed. These details mattered more than courage ever did. You notice how little drama exists in the room. No one speaks of hardship. No one frames the night as a test. It simply is what it is. The work of surviving it has been folded into routine so thoroughly that it no longer feels remarkable. This is something that often goes missing in later retellings. Memory sharpens extremes and smooths repetition. Repetition was the truth of it. The cabin feels plain now, almost unremarkable. The walls do not inspire awe, the bedding does not invite comfort. Yet everything is doing its job. That reliability carries its own quiet satisfaction. The night has not defeated you, nor have you conquered it. You have met it halfway. There are accounts that describe frontier life as relentless struggle, and others that paint it as simple and self-sufficient. Lying here, you sense that neither version captures the whole. The reality lives somewhere in between, in the long stretch of ordinary nights that demanded attention but rarely offered resolution. Survival was not dramatic. It was sustained. You feel how your body has adapted over the hours. Muscles hold warmth more efficiently. Breathing stays slow without effort. The initial sharpness of cold has softened into a steady presence. This adaptation happens quietly unnoticed, until you look back on earlier discomfort and realize it has faded. Sleep deepens again, carried by this sense of adequacy. Not abundance, not ease, just enough. That threshold mattered. Below it panic waited. Above it rest became possible. People living through winters like this learned to recognize when they had crossed it, and to stop striving for more. The stories that came later often focused on extremes. Blizzard nights, close calls, dramatic rescues. Those moments happened, but they were rare. Most nights looked like this one. Quiet, demanding, manageable. The work of staying warm blended into the background until it was almost invisible. You shift slightly and feel the bedding respond without complaint. The blankets stay in place. The fire continues its low presence. Nothing needs to be corrected right now. That realization allows your awareness to loosen again. As sleep pulls you deeper, the contrast between myth and reality loses importance. What matters is the immediate truth of the moment. You are warm enough. You are sheltered. The night continues without asking anything more from you. The cabin fades further into the background of your awareness. What remains is the slow rhythm of breath and the steady sense that this ordinary night, uncelebrated and unseen, is the one that carried people through winter after winter. Children endure the night differently than adults, and you sense this even without watching them closely. Their bodies seem to accept the conditions more readily, settling into warmth with less resistance. They curl inward naturally, limbs tucked, breath slow and steady. Where adults carry tension from the day, children release it quickly, letting sleep claim them in deeper layers. You hear it in their breathing. Even, unhurried. A rhythm that does not hesitate at every shift of sound or temperature. Frontier nights taught children early what mattered and what did not. The crack of settling wood meant nothing. The murmur of wind was familiar. Only sudden change pulled them closer to waking. Everything else folded into the background of rest. Their smaller size helps in ways adults rarely consider. Less surface area means less heat lost. Bodies fit more easily into the warm centre of shared bedding. Blankets seem to wrap them more completely. A child can disappear beneath layers that would feel constricting to a grown body. This physical difference shapes the night quietly but decisively. You remember how earlier children were guided inward when sleep began? That arrangement holds now. They are surrounded by warmth, shielded from drafts by larger bodies and thicker layers. This protection is not sentimental, it is practical. Adults accept colder positions without comment because they know children cannot. There is also something else at work. Children trust the environment more readily. They have fewer expectations to be disappointed. A hard floor, a scratchy blanket, the presence of others. None of it violates a standard of comfort they have not yet formed. Sleep arrives without negotiation. You notice how rarely children wake during the night. When they do stir, it is brief. A sigh, a small turn, then stillness again. Adults, by contrast, wake more often, listening, checking, adjusting. Responsibility sharpens awareness. Youth softens it. Some memories from this time speak of children who learn to sleep anywhere. On floors, on benches, against walls. This adaptability was not celebrated then, but it proved useful. Nights did not always offer ideal conditions. The ability to rest anyway mattered. You hear a child murmur softly, not words, just sound. Someone shifts nearby, adjusting a blanket without waking them. The motion is practiced and gentle. Care flows around children continuously, often unnoticed. The warmth at the centre of the sleeping space feels thicker, more stable. You sense it even from where you lie. Heat accumulates there and lingers longer. This pocket of comfort allows deeper rest for those inside it. Adults on the edges feel the difference and accept it. You reflect briefly on how modern expectations frame childhood comfort. Here, comfort is measured differently. Enough warmth, enough protection, enough rest to face morning. Those standards are met tonight. Sleep deepens again, carried by the steady presence of children breathing nearby. Their untroubled rest becomes part of the cabin's rhythm. It reassures without demanding attention. As your awareness softens, you let their calm draw you further down. If they can rest this deeply, the night must be holding well enough. You trust that judgment and allow sleep to thicken once more. The cold reaches its deepest point just before morning, and you feel it without opening your eyes. It is not sharp or surprising. It is dense, settled, as if the night has finally decided where it belongs. This hour has a particular stillness to it, one that feels heavier than earlier darkness. The fire is at its quietest now, not gone but reduced to a steady glow that gives more reassurance than heat. You sense its presence rather than feeling it directly. The warmth you rely on comes mostly from what has already been stored. Blankets, clothing, bodies. The choices made hours ago are carrying you through this stretch. Your breath fogs faintly inside the space beneath the covers. You pull fabric a little close to your chin, careful not to disturb the balance you have built. Small changes still matter. You have learned that by now. Even half asleep, your body responds to the cold with practiced economy. This is when the night feels longest. Not because time has slowed, but because the margin for error narrows. If something were to fail now, it would matter more than it did earlier. Fires that go out at this hour are hardest to recover. Cold that creeps in here takes longer to shake. People remembered this time clearly even when the rest of the night blurred together. You listen again. The cabin sounds steady. No new drafts, no sudden silences. The wind has softened, or perhaps you have learned its rhythm well enough that it no longer stands out. Snow presses against the walls, adding weight and quiet rather than threat. Your body draws inward, slightly conserving what warmth it has. Fingers curl, toes press together. Muscles hold just enough tension to keep circulation moving without wasting energy. This posture feels familiar now, almost comfortable in its own way. Someone near the fire stirs, then are still again. Perhaps they considered adding fuel and decided against it. Perhaps they simply adjusted their position. Either way, the system holds. No one needs to rise. That decision is felt more than seen. The air inside feels dry and cool, but not dangerous. You breathe through your nose, slow and measured. The habit has been reinforced all night. It requires no effort now. The body knows what to do. Outside, the sky begins its slow shift toward morning, though you cannot see it. There is no sudden light, no clear signal. Just a subtle easing of pressure, as if the night has reached the end of its argument. You sense this change without fully waking. Sleep thins slightly at this hour, becoming lighter and more fragile. You drift near the surface, ready to wake if needed, but content to remain where you are. This half state feels natural after such a long stretch of careful rest. The cold remains, but it no longer feels like an opponent. It is simply part of the landscape of the night, accounted for and held in check. You have made it through the most demanding hours. As awareness ebbs again, you allow yourself to rest more fully, knowing that the hardest part is passing. The cabin remains steady. Warmth holds where it needs to. Morning is not here yet, but it is close enough to sense. You settle back into stillness, carried by the quiet assurance that the night has done its worst, and you are still here. You said use more diverse expressions, do not repeat them continuously in sections. A mainstream historical fact. Historians still argue whether a quirky tidbit. Scholars still debate. ChatGPT said, understood. I'll keep everything fully organic with no detectable repetition or signalling tied to those ideas and remain inside the lived night. Whenever you're ready, say continue and I'll proceed with section 28. Waking here does not feel like a clean return to the world. It is slow-layered and physical before it is mental. You open your eyes to dim light rather than brightness, a pale grey filtering through the frost-clouded window. The fire still glows, though it barely moves now. The cabin smells colder, sharper, as if night has not fully released its hold. Your body speaks first. Stiffness announces itself in joints and spine. Muscles feel thick, slow to respond. This is expected. Sleep kept you warm enough, but it did not make you loose or rested in the way you might expect elsewhere. You take inventory without judgment. Fingers move, toes flex, nothing hurts. That is enough. You stay still for a moment longer, not out of laziness but practicality. Rising too quickly wastes warmth your body has been storing all night. People learn to wake in stages, letting circulation return before committing to motion. You draw one knee up, then the other, feeling heat shift and redistribute. The air near the floor feels colder than it did earlier. Cold settles downward, waiting. You delay contact with it as long as you can. Someone else is already moving carefully, boots scraping softly as they are pulled closer to the fire. Leather that stayed warm overnight bends without protest. Boots left too far away would not be so cooperative. You sit up slowly and feel the chill find your back immediately. Blankets slip, then are caught and folded aside with care. Nothing is thrown, nothing is rushed. Movements are deliberate, conserving both warmth and energy. This pace is not sluggish. It is efficient. The cabin looks different in morning light. Details emerge that were invisible by fire glow alone. Uneven chinking, scuffed floorboards, the shallow impressions left in bedding by bodies that slept here. Evidence of the night just past appears everywhere, then begins to disappear as people move. You breathe in and feel the air bite more sharply than before. The warmth from sleep is already thinning. This is when the day demands action. Fires need attention. Water must be checked before it freezes solid. Food preparation begins almost immediately. Lingering in bed is not an option. You pull your clothing closer around you, grateful that it's already warm. The decision to stay dressed overnight saves time and discomfort now. Bare skin meets cold reluctantly. Covered skin holds its ground. As you stand, weight returns fully to your feet. The floor is unforgiving, but you accept it. This sensation will fade as movement generates heat again. Morning warmth is earned, not given. The cabin stirs around you, quiet voices, soft movements. No one reflects on the night out loud. There is no need. Surviving it is statement enough. Attention turns forward to the tasks that will carry everyone through the day. For a moment before the rhythm of work takes over, you notice the quiet satisfaction of being awake. Not refreshed, not comfortable, simply present. The night has passed. The cabin still stands. You straighten, draw a deeper breath, and step fully into morning. As the morning settles into motion, memory begins to reshape the night you just lived through. Not immediately and not all at once. At first, everything feels physical. The stiffness in your back, the lingering chill in your hands, the faint smell of smoke woven into your clothing. Only later does the night become something you can think about rather than feel. You notice how quickly details start to blur. The exact moment the fire was adjusted, the number of times you half woke and shifted a blanket, the sounds that pulled you close to waking and then released you again. These things mattered deeply when they happened. Now they fade without ceremony. What remains is the simple knowledge that the night was managed. People who lived through winters like this rarely described each night in full. They spoke of them in groups. This winter, that long stretch in January, the year the storms kept coming. Individual nights merged together, distinguished only by the ones that went wrong. Ordinary nights vanished into routine. Their success was measured by the absence of memory. You feel this happening already. The discomfort loses its sharp edges. The careful calculations fade. What stays is a quiet confidence that the system worked. Fire-bedding bodies and habit aligned well enough. That alignment becomes trust, and trust becomes expectation. Tomorrow night will likely be the same. Stories told later often skip this part. They jumped from arrival to survival, from hardship to triumph. But lying here in the half-light of morning, you understand that the true story lives in repetition, in the way people learn to sleep well enough again and again without expecting relief. You adjust a strap or fold a blanket and feel how the night's patterns carry into the day. Blankets are shaken out near the fire. Bedding is lifted to dry. These actions are not chores so much as continuations. The night does not end cleanly at dawn. It dissolves into morning tasks. There is a quiet pride in this continuity. Not the kind that seeks recognition, but the kind that comes from knowing you met the night on its terms and did not break. That feeling sits beneath everything else, steady and grounding. As time passes, the memory of cold becomes abstract. You remember that it was there, but not how it felt against your skin. You remember being careful, but not the effort it took. This softening of memory allowed people to endure long seasons without despair. The mind protected itself by letting the hardest parts slip away. You carry that softness now as the cabin fills with daylight. The night becomes a story you will not need to tell. It becomes background context, something that made the morning possible. Even now, as you move and warm, a part of you remains tuned to the rhythm of last night. You move efficiently. You conserve motion. You respect warmth. These habits persist beyond sleep, shaping the day as surely as they shaped the night. By the time the sun lifts higher, the night will feel distant, almost unreal. Yet its influence remains in every choice you make. How you layer clothing, where you stand, when you rest. The night taught you these things quietly without instruction. You take one last moment to acknowledge that learning, then let it fade. The cabin hums with morning life now. The night has done its work and stepped back, leaving you ready for whatever the day demands. The cabin begins to loosen its grip on the night as daylight strengthens, though it does not release everything at once. Cold lingers in corners and along the floor, holding on where it can. The fire, coaxed back into something brighter, changes the shape of the room again. Shadows shorten, details sharpen. The space feels less like a shelter and more like a place where a day can happen. You feel this shift inside yourself as well. The careful stillness of night gives way to purposeful movement. Muscles warm, breath deepens, hands find work. Yet part of you remains tuned to what the night required. You move with the same economy, the same awareness of warmth and effort. Those habits do not vanish with sunrise. They remain shaping how you meet the day. You look around and see traces of sleep already disappearing. Bedding is lifted and shaken. Blankets are folded or hung near the fire. The shallow hollows where bodies rested fade as materials regain their shape. What looked like a crowded, layered arrangement hours ago becomes ordinary again. By midday there will be little evidence that so many people shared this space through the coldest hours. This is how nights passed here. Not marked by ceremony, not remembered individually. They slipped into one another, forming a season rather than a series of events. Winter was endured not through single acts of bravery, but through repetition that rarely drew attention to itself. You sense how easily the cabin could now host stories that make the night seem harsher, or simpler than it was. Memory reshapes experience quickly, but lying here you carry the truth of it in your body. Sleep was not comfortable, it was sufficient, it was negotiated. It depended on choices made hours before rest ever began. As the day settles in the cabin no longer feels like something you must actively manage. It becomes background again, a familiar structure rather than a constant negotiation. That shift is subtle, but you feel it clearly. The night demanded awareness, the day allows routine. You step closer to the door and feel cold air press in briefly as it opens. Daylight floods the space pale and steady. The outside world looks unchanged by the care that went into surviving the night. Snow still lies heavy. The sky remains wide and indifferent. Yet you know something important has happened. You made it through. This knowledge does not need celebration. It settles quietly the way warmth did hours ago. It becomes part of how you stand, how you move, how you look at the next night waiting far ahead. As the cabin fills with morning sound, the memory of sleeping here begins to soften. Soon it will feel distant. Soon it will feel ordinary. But for now, in this brief space between night and full day, you still feel the echo of shared warmth, careful breath, and practiced stillness. You let that echo fade gently. The story of how people slept through winter nights like this does not end with waking. It continues in the habits they carried forward night after night, season after season, until surviving became routine. Now the pace slows again, not because night has returned, but because memory begins to drift. Imagine the cabin growing quieter once more, not with darkness, but with familiarity. The sharp edges of cold soften in recollection. The sounds blur into something distant and safe. What remains is the steady understanding that people learn to rest where rest seemed unlikely. Let your breathing lengthen. Let your shoulders ease. Picture the fire settling back into embers, the kind that glow without demanding attention. The walls hold. The floor is solid beneath you. The night once demanding now feels far away. You are no longer listening for danger. You're no longer counting warmth. The body remembers that it has done enough for now. You can let go of the careful vigilance that guided you through the coldest hours. Imagine the cabin slowly emptying not of people but of urgency. What remains is quiet, steady and safe. The lessons of the night stay with you, but they no longer ask anything in return. Let the images fade, let the sounds soften. If sleep has not yet taken you, allow it now. You have walked through the night. You have rested where rest was possible. You can drift without effort. Sweet dreams!